This is the podcast, Ben, called Perino on Politics, and I just call up my smart friends and say, what is happening? And I thought I would start off by saying I was reminded the other day as Trump has won and he's coming back on the scene, and the news cycle immediately speeds up. In 2017, I think it was, I was at my apartment on a Saturday, and I thought, I'm just going to close my eyes for a minute. And I dozed for about 20 minutes. And when I woke up, 3 news stories had broken. And I feel like we are getting back on that same thing. I was asked what I thought about Matt Gaetz's nomination on an early morning on Thursday. And I said, oh, you know what? By 5 o'clock, there'll be something else. And sure enough, there was. So we are back in it. We are in the soup. And there's nobody better for us to talk to than you. Thanks for being here.
You bet. Thanks for having me. Yeah, I totally agree. As soon as the election was over, my wife was like, oh, now you can finally get some sleep. I was like, you do not understand this process. Not at all.
A colleague of mine took 3 well-deserved days off after the election week. But all the news was happening right afterwards because President Trump is really going to hit the ground running. He knows what he wants to do. And I thought maybe I could just get your overall thoughts on, let's start with the Democrats. And it's been interesting to watch their evolution of disbelief and then acceptance and anger and bargaining with themselves and all of those stages of grief that you go through after a loss. But I'm not sure that the majority of Democrats fully understand why they lost.
I think that's right. I think that, I was talking with a liberal friend of mine recently, and this liberal friend, this is the other night, said, I'm at a dinner party with a bunch of my friends, and I want to do something fun. I'm just going to put you on speakerphone with a bunch of very high-ranking Hollywood liberals. And he said, like, why did we lose? And I said, well, the reason you lost is because you're completely culturally disconnected from the country. I mean, obviously, Joe Biden ran a terrible administration, obviously inflation, obviously bad foreign policy. And yes, all of that's true. But the single most effective ad of the entire campaign cycle was President Trump's ad that Democrats are for they, them, and we're for you. And what that was
just so people know that I don't know exactly how the measurement works, but when you look at ads persuasiveness and you try to qualify that, let's just say that an ad doesn't move you at all. That's a 0, and it goes to like a scale of 5. The transgender ad that you're talking about moved 2.7, which is quite significant. So an amazing return on investment, and the Trump team nailed that messaging, and it worked for them.
Yeah, and I think that, again, the disconnect between sort of the cultural values of the coast and the rest of the country becomes particularly egregious when people are suffering, when people are like, okay, listen, all I want is to not be mugged in broad daylight on a city street. All I want is to be able to pay for my groceries, and here you're lecturing me about the importance of women playing in men's sports or vice versa. Like that cultural disconnect, when you overlay that with an economic disconnect, is losing from here till the end of time. And I think that was the big problem for Democrats. And they're trying to figure out exactly how to square that. I think right now you're seeing that battle play out inside the Democratic Party. We're seeing some, I think, more mainstream Democrats starting to say, hey, guys, maybe we ought to drop the woke stuff. We should drop the intersectional stuff and the trans stuff, and we should just focus in on the economic program. I'm not sure even that's going to be enough, specifically because President Trump ran, shockingly, a moderate campaign, right? And this is the thing I was saying throughout the election cycle. Donald Trump actually positionally occupied the center of the political spectrum on pretty much every issue. On abortion, he said this is not a federal issue, this is a state's issue. That's a moderate position. When he says that he's going to take same-sex marriage out of the platform, that is a moderate position. When he takes the position that the United States is not going to touch any of the entitlement programs, that is a far cry from sort of Tea Party Republicanism from circa 2010. So, he took a lot of the central ground away from Harris. And so it's sort of hard to see where Democrats, have a Republican vulnerability to prey upon here, other than if there's some sort of exogenous event that obviously redounds poorly for President Trump and his new administration. And so I think that they really are struggling. And you're going to see that fight continue because I'm not sure how you square this circle, right? They've been operating in a 2012 Barack Obama mentality that the coalition of Democrats is majority-minority coalition with heavy white female turnout, single white female turnout. That was how they were going to put together their coalition. And that turns out to be a chimera. It only works when Barack Obama is on the ballot. They tried it in 2016 and Hillary lost. In 2020, it was an outlier election because of the COVID pandemic and BLM and the mail-in ballots. And then 2024, they got shellacked again. in the same exact way. And so they're going to have to remake their coalition, because what Trump showed is that that is a bad way to approach the American people. I spent this election cycle going around with a bunch of different Senate candidates, and two of them were Bernie Moreno up in Ohio and Senator Cruz down in Texas. Went all the way up to northern Ohio, very white town, and they have the same exact priorities as the people who are living in the Rio Grande Valley, 97% Hispanic. And you can give the same speech from both places, and they respond exactly the same way. They just want a normal life. That's all they want. They're tired of the lack of normality. And, I debated Sam Harris on this, and he kept saying, Donald Trump isn't normal. I said, I think you keep using the word normal in a sense that Americans aren't talking about. Obviously, Donald Trump isn't a normal character, right? There's nothing normal about President Trump. He's an outlier, just statistically, on every possible measure. But what people are looking for is a sense of normality in their own life. Again, do grocery costs twice what they used to? Am I going to get mugged on the street? Am I going to send my kid to school and find out later that the teacher's been calling him Janie while I'm not looking? Like that's all I want. All I want is to be able to go to my church and go to my job and then come home and be with my family and live a good, solid life with the prospect of the American dream before. That's all people want. And Trump is promising that.
There's somebody that you and I both know, Congressman Seth Moulton of Massachusetts. He's a Democrat, a veteran, the father of two young girls. And he came out and said, why should I be afraid to say that I don't think boys should play in girls' sports? And Tufts University, they backed off of it afterwards, but their initial response was, we will no longer allow any of our students to do an internship with you. And I think that it was like, well, guys, you just proved Seth's point.
Exactly. Now, it's psychotic. And if they continue along these lines, which I hope they do, then Republicans are going to have, a very solid, robust reign here. They've blown their connection with the American people. And what they really need to do is go back to the drawing board the way the Democratic Leadership Council did in the early 1990s. And they're going to have to find a third way again, because if they don't, then Republicans are just going to win.
And what do you make of AOC removing her pronouns from her bio? What is going on?
I have no idea. It's hard to speculate about what she's doing, but I think that she is realizing. See, the thing about AOC is that she is, in fact, a fairly good politician masquerading as a radical. She has always done this sort of, I'm Ilhan Omar, I'm Rashida Tlaib, I'm part of the resistance routine. But when it comes right down to it, she does what Nancy Pelosi wants her to do. And if she feels like the Democratic Party is moving in a less culturally, warrior kind of direction, I think that she removes the pronouns. And she's like, I just don't want that to be an issue anymore. So, again, I think that she's a good. Yeah, it is fascinating.
There's an underreported story that I think is worth talking about. And it is that something that you did, right? You left a blue state for a red state for lots of reasons that you've talked about before. In the next census, the Republicans are going to gain the possibility of several more seats in the Congress because people are making decisions like voting with their feet and going to a place where either they wanted more freedom, economic opportunity, better weather, better governance, they want the trash picked up, they want to be safe, better schools, whatever those things are. I think it's a little bit of an underreported story that the problems for the Democrats are more deep-seated than people realize. It's not just that they lost an election, they lost a coalition, and they're going to lose geographically too. And that could have big changes for, I don't know, quite a while the Democrats try to find their footing. And it could be an issue that galvanizes them to find their footing. I don't know who the leader is going to be that emerges. I'm here to watch all of it. I'm curious and want to see. But I think that's an underreported story in this postmortem.
Absolutely. Well, first of all, the 2020 census was done wrong. I mean, this is a point that I made on the show. If they'd done the 2020 census right, and Census Bureau acknowledges this under Joe Biden, that they absolutely undercounted Florida, they undercounted Texas, they undercounted Arizona, they undercounted Idaho, they undercounted a lot of the red states. If they had done a proper count, then this election would have been over without even going to the blue wall states, because that would have shifted electoral votes and congressional districts south. By 2030, you're looking at a minimum of 12 to 13 electoral votes shifting from states like New York, Connecticut, New Jersey, California, Illinois, down to states like Texas and Florida. And that is a disaster area for the Democrats, because now you're talking about, a real systemic uphill battle. I mean, right now, there are 25 states that have a full Republican slate of senators. And there are only 22 states that have a full Democratic slate of senators. There are 50 senators on the Republican side of the aisle who are from full red states. And then there are only now That only leaves 3 states left. There are only 3 states that have a divided senatorial caucus, right? One of them is Pennsylvania. One of them is Wisconsin. And one, I'm trying to remember what the third one is. But Pennsylvania and Wisconsin, both of those are trending red, right? Virginia is trending blue. Pennsylvania and Wisconsin trending red. And both of those states, Eric Hovde lost by the slimmest margin as possible to lose in Wisconsin.
Can I admit something that's embarrassing? I saw that the Wisconsin was called for President Trump, and I had seen how close the Hovde race was against Tammy Baldwin. And I don't know what I missed. This is the whole idea of taking a nap for 20 minutes. The next morning, I'm about to do America's Newsroom, and I look down at my sheet, and it says that Tammy Baldwin won re-election. And I said, no, that's wrong. They said, no, it's correct. I'm like, wait, what happened? I couldn't believe it, Ben.
Yep. Late night ballot dumps. And, again, Eric Hovde is very concerned about that. The third state, by the way, is Maine, which will trend blue because Susan Collins eventually will retire. But,
she just announced that she's going to run again.
Oh, really?
Yeah, that just happened today. Yeah.
Wow. Again, I went to sleep for 20 minutes and things happen. But, with that as the future of the Democratic Party, you're looking at the possibility of Republicans picking up another couple seats in places like Pennsylvania and in Wisconsin. And now you're looking at like a 52, 53 seat kind of regular majority for Republicans. And by the way, that's missing Arizona. Arizona right now is completely blue. They have 2 blue senators from Arizona. Donald Trump won that state by 5 points. So Arizona is going to turn red. So you could be looking at up to 50, 54 seats, 55 seats
and
for
Georgia.
Republicans in the Senate. Right, and that's right. Georgia has 2 blue senators as well. That's correct. So that's another state. So you could theoretically be looking at 27 states that have up to 29, depending on how Pennsylvania and Wisconsin trend, that have 2 red senators from them, which is a dominant, sort of Republican. And again, all of that is because it's worse to live in blue states than red states. So this is the thing I think Democrats have not yet faced down.
Yeah.
Their terrible governance is driving people to states that are not voting for them. And again, this is what happens when there's a population separation. California is getting bluer, but that means Florida is getting a lot redder. Right? When I brought my family, and it wasn't just me, I brought my family, I brought my in-laws, I brought my parents, I brought a couple of sisters, one from Virginia, one from New Jersey, right? They all came down to Florida. Donald Trump won Florida by more points than he lost New York. Right? Florida is now less of a swing state than New York is. That's how things are shifting in this country. And that's an amazing thing.
I remember last week when Eva Longoria said to great fanfare that she was leaving America. She's going to live in Spain and Mexico. And she highlighted homelessness and taxes as the reasons. And then the third reason was Trump. And I thought, but the first 2 reasons have nothing to do with Trump.
She could just move to Florida.
Yeah, you're leaving California. Exactly. She could move to Florida. But anyway, bye-bye to Eva Longoria. May I ask you, as a last question here, about Florida politics, which is going to get shaken up a little bit, not in terms of Republican or Democrat, but you're going to have new people because Marco Rubio will be Secretary of State. And then you have Michael Waltz going into the National Security Council. And then Matt Gaetz, with whatever happens on his confirmation, he has resigned from Congress. So are there people that you're looking at as possibilities that you would recommend for those elections, special elections, or the appointment?
I think it's going to be a pretty fraught primary in both of those seats because those are both solidly red seats. And so we'll have to see, who crops up. As far as the Senate appointment, my imagining would probably be that Governor DeSantis obviously, I think, has his eye on that Senate seat in a couple of years himself. He's termed out as governor over here. And so I think that there's a high possibility that he nominates somebody that he names somebody like James Uthmeyer, who's his chief of staff, longtime sort of insider Florida Politico, to fill that seat for a couple of years, knowing that in a couple of years he can, take that seat himself. Obviously, there was a lot of lobbying. There's some interplay between sort of Team DeSantis and Team Trump down here. Obviously, Team Trump was very interested in having Lara Trump fill that seat. I think that's unlikely. I think that if she wants it, she's going to have to run for it. And let's be real about this. Governor DeSantis has moved the state wildly to the right. When Governor DeSantis took office in 2018, he won that office by a sliver of a percentage point. When he won re-elect by 20 percentage points. This state now has 1 million more registered Republicans than Democrats, and DeSantis has run this place like clockwork. So, I think that, the idea that it's Trump versus DeSantis, I think, listen, Ron DeSantis is the best governor in America, and I think that's going to have a lot of coattails for him moving forward.
In this segment, Ben, I wondered if we could talk about what's next for Israel in your perspective, but I also very much want to touch on the violence in Amsterdam against Jews, how it was planned, how the intel and police were slow to respond, and also how the media reacted. I saw this headline from NPR that said violence erupted at a game. And that was it. That it didn't address a very concerning problem. I am alarmed by it. And I wanted to get your take on both what could happen in Israel now and also anti-Semitism in the fight.
Yeah, so when it comes to Amsterdam, the initial story obviously was played by the media as there were some Israeli soccer hooligans and they were making trouble, and then that led to retaliation by Palestinians and Palestinian supporters in Amsterdam. And that's actually not quite what happened. There were some Israeli soccer hooligans who pulled down a Palestinian flag a couple of days before there was a soccer match, and then nothing. And then there was the soccer match, and the police stationed people at the stadium knowing that violence was likely to erupt from the radicalized Muslim population of Amsterdam, many of whom are citizens. And after the soccer match, a bunch of people walked out, the people who had flown, many people had flown in from Israel for this Maccabi Tel Aviv game, big soccer team in Israel, and people were walking out into the streets, and there was organized violence. I mean, this has been planned on WhatsApp, it had been planned on Telegram. There was clear coordination with Uber drivers who were literally, running after people in the streets while shouting "Free Palestine." They were going to hotels where Israelis were staying and trying to break through the front doors of the hotels. And the proof is in the pudding. I mean, it wasn't just like a one-time thing. These riots went on for days. I mean, they've been going on, I believe, continuously still. And that is also now exacerbating in Paris. There have been some riots in Paris because there's an Israeli youth soccer team that's going to play there. And so basically anytime an Israeli team of any sort is in a place with a lot of radicalized Muslims, violence is now breaking out. There's an Israeli soccer match that was planned originally for Turkey. It's now had to be moved to Germany because of all that. And they're going to play it without a crowd. So, I mean, like this is the kind of stuff that's breaking out kind of all over Europe. And listen, Ayaan Hirsi Ali was talking about this 20 years ago. There's nothing new here. Mark Stein was talking about this. Gert Wilders in the Netherlands was talking about this. Like, if you import large populations of people who don't like your civilization or Jews, you should then not be particularly surprised when they're willing to burn trains and run down Jews in the streets. That's just how this works. And so this sort of bizarre assertion by the Angela Merkels of the world that you can import endless numbers of people from civilizations that don't particularly like your own and they'll have no impact. It's obviously stupid. It's also leading to a radical political backlash in Europe that I think is quite well earned. And you're going to see that exacerbate over the course of time for sure.
And in Israel, we have an ambassador, Mike Huckabee, who's been announced. And that I know that it came as a surprise to him, but that he is ready to go. He is excited about this opportunity. But also, one of the things that President Trump promised is that they will not hold back aid or weaponry that Israel needs in order to protect its citizens.
Yes, and that's a major sea change. So obviously I have a lot of friends in Israel. I know a lot of people in the Israeli government as well. All I can tell you is that the amount of overwhelming relief and joy at President Trump's election was astonishing. I mean, I was being sent videos from the front lines in Lebanon of soldiers literally praying for Trump's election before the election, like on the front lines. Like the polls of Israeli citizens is something 80-20 in favor of President Trump over Kamala Harris. And that's because they understand that Trump wants to let them win the war, and Biden wants to slow walk them into stalemate and or loss. And so they are very, very happy, obviously, that President Trump is the president. None of them want Americans involved directly in the war, and the sort of lie that everybody who's pro-Israel is desperate for America to go to war on behalf of Israel, that obviously is not true.
No.
The Trump administration certainly is not interested in going to war in the Middle East. I mean, this is an anti-war administration. What they want to do is make sure that America's allies are strong enough that they can stand up for themselves and that they win the war quickly and savagely. And I think that that's exactly what is happening right now. Israel wants to finish off what it's doing in Lebanon. It wants to finish off what it's doing in Gaza. And it wants to scare the mullahs down from whatever nuclear threat they are facilitating. And Israel is now in very good position to do that. I think that you're going to see by the beginning of next year a wrap-up in operations in Lebanon. I think it's going to happen over the course of the next couple of months. I think that there's going to be a transition to some form of military rule in the Gaza Strip that is much more solidified. They're finishing up operations in northern Gaza right now in places like Jabalia. And as far as Iran has been put on notice. I think you saw this because the mullahs announced it, that if they hit Israel again, Israel's going to just take out all of their nuclear facilities and or oil fields. They were jabbering about how they were going to retaliate to Israel and their latest military strike, which took out the S-300s from Russia and all of this. And now they've really backed down. They realized that with Trump coming in, that's not a game they can play, which again shows you that just weakness on foreign policy breeds aggression by your enemies. This is the most simple thing in the entire world. And for some reason, the entire left refuses to understand it. weakness and perception of weakness breeds aggression. And by the way, there are a lot of people who are very concerned about what Trump is going to do about Ukraine. I think the thing about President Trump, he doesn't like losing. And so the thing that he really doesn't want is an image of Vladimir Putin strolling down the street in Kyiv as the Russians roll the tanks across the rest of the border. Like that's not something that Trump wants. What Trump is going to do, I would imagine, and I think that he's already telegraphed this, is he's going to say to Putin, listen, we all know what a deal looks like. A deal looks like a freezing of the lines in Donbass, in Crimea, perhaps you annexing some of that territory, neutrality guarantees by Ukraine, radical rearming of Ukraine such that they dissuade you from pursuing a further occupation and or invasion of Ukraine. And if you don't do that, we're going to continue arming Ukraine. I think the idea that there's going to be like a straight off arms cutoff to Ukraine, if Trump believes that that's going to result in Putin actually just walking in Kyiv, then I don't think that's going to happen. J.D. Vance, by the way, has said as much.
I agree. And also I think about how Biden was basically like, let me help you lose slowly.
Yes.
And so that has meant a lot more death, destruction, and problems. And so we'll see. That's my favorite response to everybody. Is like, we'll see. We're at that stage in the of the transition, but I think we're going to see pretty quickly how these changes can affect foreign policy and other things. And that's why you need to listen to the Ben Shapiro show, because then you can get smart with him. Ben, I usually ask, what are you paying attention to right now that I might be missing? Is there anything on your radar that you're kind of watching a trend or seeing how something turns out?
I think obviously it's something we're all paying attention to is sort of the appointment process, how that's going to play out. Obviously, there's a lot of internal conflict inside the Senate about some of the nominees that President Trump is putting forward. There's a lot of talk about recess appointments. Again, I don't think that I understand why President Trump wants the recess appointments. Some of his nominees were held up last time by a non-Republican Senate. But I think that the importance of the process remains. I think that the Senate is a place of institutions, and the advice and consent process is generally a good one. I think that the American people finding out more about these nominees, and then they can hold their senators to account, depending on how they vote on those nominees. Yeah. I think that's good. I don't think it would be in President Trump's interest to run up directly against a majority in the House and a majority in the Senate very early on in his administration over a controversial nominee when he can easily replace pretty much anybody that he's naming right now with an equivalent or better. I think that the name that comes to mind, obviously, because he's the most controversial, is Matt Gaetz. Right? Mm-hmm. Matt Gaetz obviously is going to face a lot of opposition in the Senate, not only because of how he conducted himself in the House, but obviously because of open questions about House ethics investigations and all the rest of that sort of stuff. If that happens, it's not as though President Trump doesn't have a list of 100 lawyers he can pick for AG who will bring exactly the same qualities Matt Gaetz would bring, except maybe without so much of the baggage. And so, I think that the Trump it'll be interesting to see how pragmatic the Trump administration is. I think he wants to get things done. And so I think that, it's very easy to watch all the shiny objects in the Trump administration. But I think what we learned from Trump 1 is that the shiny objects, that ain't where the action is. Right? Watch what they're actually doing. Watch the results of the policy. Don't watch all of the sort of, frivolous talk about, oh my God, is RFK going to ban diet soda or something? Like one of the things that I've been saying about President Trump for a long time is that Donald Trump, what you get, what the institutions are, they're a strainer. And Donald Trump puts a lot of stuff in that strainer. And the strainer ends up taking out a lot of the stuff that I think that the American people think is kind of bad or not great. And what you end up with at the end is a really, really excellent product. I think that was the story of Trump 1. I think that'll be the story of Trump 2. I saw this tweet from somebody I don't usually follow, but it was retweeted so many times by people I must follow that's why it came to me. It was that women of the world will unite if RFK tries to ban Diet Coke. It will make January 6th look like a clown show. And I was like, I'm going to sign up for that one because I do enjoy that little soda once in a while. What can people find at the Daily Wire right now in the next little bit? Obviously, we have released on streaming Am I Racist, the #1 documentary of the last 10 years, Matt Walsh's fantastic documentary. You can now get that. There are extras. There's behind-the-scenes stuff over at Daily Wire. We have new stuff coming out all the time. New content, all access with people like me. You can hang out with me and watch me do dumb things on camera and all the rest of that kind of stuff behind the paywall. So go on over to Daily Wire Plus right now. Get a subscription, and it's a lot of fun. I think it's a great way to join the fight. Thank you for being with us.